Yeah, I'll take care of that.
And I'm going to help you guys along the way. Gosh, I hated that. So I got the most beginner pickleball player I could find. I typed in
Morning, everyone. We're going to wait for people to trickle in the next minute or so before we get started. But yeah, just a reminder to keep your mics muted unless you have a question. And if you do, please raise your hand or throw it in the chat. Perfect. Well, welcome everyone to Energy Fundamentals, Understanding Your Energy Bill. My name's Alex Thrower. I'm a senior analyst working in energy efficiency, and I'm joined today by a partner in crime, Adam Dixon. And we are going to be presenting you folks with, Understanding Your Energy Bill.
Okay. Thank you, Alex. I will kind of take over from here. So kind of introduction here. Just give me a second to figure out my slides. So hopefully by the end of this workshop, you'll be able to kind of identify some of the fixed charges on your bill. So not all of your bill, as you may be aware, is made up of your consumption on your bill. There are some charges that come in there that you are required to pay to kind of keep the grid up and running. There's understand the differences between a kilowatt and a kilowatt hour and how you may or may not be billed for those two things. And it can be when evaluating some sort of energy savings or projects, it can drastically change how you look at that. Identify tools to compare different billing types. So depending on your situation, there are some tools out there from the Ontario Energy Board to kind of evaluate what type rate structure you may want to be on. And now just kind of fully upfront, this workshop, we concentrate primarily on kind of the residential, commercial, small, medium businesses. The large, maybe class A and some class B customers, if you're a large industrial facility, we don't really dive into that much in this workshop. We'll kind of mention it a little bit, but that's a fairly complicated billing structure, so we could not fit that into 1 hour here. So I know Save on Energy has a webinar coming up dedicated strictly to that. So if that's your situation, I would recommend attending that one as well. Although I do think if that's your situation for your working situation, I think this is handy here too as well for kind of at home and other things. It does help you save money at home. So learn some energy efficiency and conservation tips by understanding how your bill and access some free tools and resources to support your energy literacy. So myself, I am Adam Dixon. So I work for a small little company based in Waterloo, Ontario here called No Energy. So I guess you read here, I've been knowing energy since 2013. So it's kind of when I dove into this world somewhat full-time. I kind of work part-time in this world for the majority of my life, as the company is just me and my father, and he has been doing it for 40 plus years. And I've spent countless hours looking at energy bills. My first job was actually just looking at thousands of energy bills, entering them into a database. And at that time, I had kind of very little knowledge of the difference between a kilowatt and a kilowatt hour. So I was just plugging information in here. I saw KW, I saw KWH, didn't know what I was doing with it. And it ended up kind of actually coming back to bite me a few years later. When I was doing more advanced work, I had to download data from that database I populated, and it kind of fixed my own mistakes. So starting out with some energy literacy and basics can kind of help you in more ways than just saving money. So why understand energy rates? So it helps you evaluate projects with the right price. So that's kind of a primary one here, depending on how you're built, from small individual home up until a massive manufacturing facility. Knowing what price per kilowatt or kilowatt hours to apply to your savings projects is quite important. If you take kind of the total on your bill and just divided it by your kilowatt hours, which is kind of a logical thing to do, that's what most people are aware you build, that's going to give you an incorrect price when evaluating your projects or your savings area. You want to actually use the price of the next kilowatt hour that you're going to use, or kilowatt or not use, and then use that to evaluate your price. And depending on what rate structure you're on, that can be vastly different. That can range from 2 cents a kilowatt hour up until 28 cents a kilowatt hour, depending on how you are billed. So help you evaluate alternative rate structures. So we're going to go through a tool to kind of evaluate 3 different rate structures that are available to you in Ontario for kind of residential up to small businesses. And then kind of above that, it's a bit more complicated, and you may need to bring in some kind of coaching or help to figure out where you need to be. So compare various energy sources and equivalent units and present cost saving opportunities. So just looking at your data and kind of understanding what's going on and how you're billed, there may be some opportunities to save money primarily, but also save energy, and kind of understanding how this works. So 2 ways that we pay for electricity in Ontario right now. So there's the residential, small commercial, kind of medium commercial. It's how much. So you pay your price per kilowatt hour based on its time of use, tiered rate, ultra low rate, or kind of a contract price as well. So it's kind of everything is baked in. You have a few regulatory charges, delivery charges, but all of your kilowatt hour encompasses all of the things like your global adjustment is a word you may have heard of, or the Ontario Energy Market Price, which took over from the HOEP price recently, which you may have heard before. So then commercial institutional. So we're talking in this one, we're talking about Class B. So a 50 kilowatt demand and above, up until maybe one megawatt is kind of where that lies. And then you start to dive into the jumping between Class A and Class B. So in this rate class, you're billed for how fast. So a kilowatt is how fast you're using energy, as well as your consumption, which is your kilowatt hour, which is how much you use. So that's the difference, how much and how fast you're billed on a Class B. Residential, you're just billed for your consumption there. When you get up into Class A, depending on if you're industrial manufacturing, it may be at 500 kilowatts or at 1 megawatt is where you jump, where you can make the decision to go between those 2 rate classes. But again, if you're thinking about that, or you're in Class A, I would highly recommend, and you want to learn more, attend the future webinars there coming up. So residential rate structures here. So there's kind of 4 different ones that are available to you. So there's the time of use rate, where most people know about this one. You pay a on peak, mid peak, and off peak rate depending on when you use your energy. There's the tiered rate. So there's a kind of a base tier. So you pay X dollars per kilowatt hour up until a certain rate, and about 600 kilowatts. And then above that, you pay another rate, a little bit higher rate above there. So then there's this it's a kind of a newer structure. It's this ultra low price kilowatt hours. So this is kind of a intriguing one for people who maybe don't work a traditional 9-to-5 job or something like that, or you are looking at putting in some sort of renewables, energy storage, things like that. You can kind of get creative with how to drastically reduce your energy bill using this ultra low pricing. This is when I mentioned 2 cents or 2.5 cents a kilowatt hour. You can get down as low as that if you use the majority of your energy overnight, as well as contract pricing. So you may go out to a third-party contractor, and you can actually contract your electricity there. So all this information, and any information about energy prices, how they work, how they change, if you want more information on that, the Ontario Energy Board has all that information out there for you. So there's a link there. There's lots of tools, things like that, to be able to calculate where you may or may be, and frequently asked questions on these. So if we don't provide the answer to a question you have today, it's probably out there somewhere. I see something in the chat. Just want to make sure. Does it need to be addressed right away? Good morning. Just wondering if there are impacts on the MRP price in Ontario. We'll kind of get into the details of that, but it will affect your energy bill, but maybe not as much as people kind of think. It's kind of designed to, as of right now, somewhat be the same effects as it was before. So there was the kind of the HOBP price and as well as your global adjustment. So as one was higher, the other one was typically lower. Right now, as far as I understand it, it's going to be a similar structure, but that could change over time. But the goal to reduce the costs for everybody out there. And I know there's actually, I was going to post it a bit later in the chat. There is a video. There's a 3-minute video that ISO has put on their YouTube channel, which I watched, and there's also a longer one explaining this kind of information. So I can post that in the chat. But I am unable to use the chat function for some reason. So I will figure out a way to get that posted to you. I will, if Alex, you're able to look up, there's a video called A New Era in Ontario's Electricity Market.
Absolutely. I will give that in the chat before the end of the session.
Yeah, there's a good video there. It's just 3 minutes, kind of gives you the overview of that. There's also lots of information talking about that exact question online, as well as I know in Ontario here recently, BOMA. So they did a webinar that we can maybe also post a link to, explaining kind of this new market renewal policy here. So it's about an hour and a half, that one, so it's a little bit longer, but it dives into a lot more depth on how this new kind of structure works. So time of use pricing and tiered pricing. So time of use pricing, peak periods change from summer to winter. So on peaks, mid peaks, and off peaks. And you can, when you log on to your local LDC website, which I think nowadays using your actual dashboard on your LDC is a lot more handy than using an actual physical bill. Most of the information is on your bill, but I think you can do a lot more with actually logging in and getting the digital information. And later on, I'll kind of walk through a little bit of a typical Ontario LDC for a residential situation. So here right now, so this is from, I don't know, this is actually a little bit out of date, so it's changed over. So just switch the mid and the on peaks pricing for kind of the colors would change for May 1st to October 31st. So on peak right now, you're paying 15.8 cents per kilowatt hour. Mid peak, you're paying 12.2 cents, and then off peak, you're paying 7.6 cents. And then so that was up until April 30th. May 1st, that would switch where the mid peak is actually 7 a.m. to 11 a.m. and 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. and then the on peak is 11 to 5. And they kind of adjust those based on the demand within the province. So in the summer, when more air conditioning is on, they kind of want to motivate people to maybe use a little bit less energy during the day so they can kind of predict and account and not have to generate or put on as many generators as possible within the province there. So tiered rate. So this is kind of a little bit, let's say, somewhat simple structure. Actually, no, back to time of use. So time of use can be one of the more difficult ones to calculate kind of what price to use in terms of energy saving projects. So, I mean, at home, sometimes people don't always think about or go and do the detailed calculation on an energy saving project. A lot of the things we do in our homes, we kind of know they're going to save us energy and we hopefully just see it reflected on our bill. We don't do the calculation ahead of time. But in businesses, you want to do that. So what I would recommend doing here is on your website for your LDC, you can find your distribution of when you use on peak, mid peak, and off peak. So then you can calculate an average marginal rate of electricity there. So it's the average marginal rate, so the cost of the next kilowatt hour minus all of those fixed charges that you see on your bill. So then tiered rate. So this is somewhat simpler. So there's 2 different tiers. So up until about, depending on your contract, up until about 600-ish kilowatt hours, you pay 9.3 cents a kilowatt hour, and then above that, you pay 11 cents. So with this rate structure, if kind of, when you're evaluating projects, you have to somewhat make an estimation of, well, first of all, know how much you use up front. So if you're in and around the break point where the price changes, you may need to do a bit more of a calculation. But if you're kind of below it or above it, you want to pick from the higher bucket to calculate your energy savings calculations there. So if you're in the 2,000 kilowatt hours and you're putting in a few LED lights, you can say the savings are going to be at that 11 cents per kilowatt hour there. So let's just think about that. And the ultra low rate overnight, so no seasonal variation of the peaks. So you basically on peak. So this one, there's a bigger range in the prices, but the opportunity, if you maybe you work shift work and you consume a lot more energy overnight, or your small business works overnight and you consume a lot, you can pay 2.8 cents a kilowatt hour on the ultra low rate, and then the weekend off peak is 7.6 cents. So again, if you work a kind of different schedule than the typical, then it may have an opportunity to save you a lot of money here. So, or you can implement some sort of battery storage in your building, and you can then charge up your batteries overnight from the grid at 2.8 cents and potentially use them during the day to kind of offset. So then all your energy is hopefully at 2.8 cents or 7.6 cents, which is drastically cheaper than the rest of them. So they've kind of brought this in to kind of move the peaks a little bit, with more and more buildings becoming electrified in Ontario. That's kind of a common trend. Heat pumps, electric vehicles, things like that. There's a lot more electrical capacity coming online. So the ISO wants to be able to still provide a stable, predictable grid. So if they can move some of the peaks and don't have to bring on as much production, it kind of allows them to control the grid a little bit better there. So
Adam, we have one question from the chat asking about what is the rate structure for the interval meter? So I believe at kind of like at what interval are these measurements taken, and if that's happening at the hourly?
So these measurements are taken on the 15-minute. It's all 15-minute interval data. So anything here it's all based on the 15 minutes. So, and I'll show you. There's going to be I'll have a kind of a interval data profile coming up here in a little bit. Kind of we talk a little bit about demand and how that can affect certain customers' energy bill. So seasonal variations, we've kind of discussed this a little bit there. So summer, weekends, holidays, and then winter, kind of to deal with somewhat the extra cooling load that comes on in the province in the summer months there. So they create that on peak there to maybe motivate you to turn your thermostat down a little bit. And there's also programs, if you don't remember to do this, or you want to kind of save a little bit of money during the day, there's a peak saver program in Ontario. So depending on the thermostat you have, things like that, the ISO can actually come in, sort of adjust your temperature by, I think, up to a half a degree. And they do sometimes provide some financial incentives for you to do that. I know when I did that recently, I got a $75 Save on Energy prepaid MasterCard that was quite handy. So a little bit of a bonus if you want to save a little bit of money. So there's some tools out there to assess the impact of switching to an energy contract, and you can visit the Ontario Energy Board's tool calculator out there. So you can put in some of your consumptions here and then kind of evaluate what credits you get, and then it'll show you how much you may be paying on a kind of a fixed contract as opposed to those time of use rates there. So kind of handy tool, depending if you're on the Ontario Electricity Support Program, you may want to go look into that program there. This allows a bit more sometimes predictability in your energy bills if you're looking to budget that way. So how we pay for electricity in our homes in Ontario. So there's the service charge. So usually you have a fixed monthly charge, with sometimes there's a small portion of that is tied to your consumption, but it's usually only a few dollars. So you pay a fixed charge to kind of keep your local LDC running and some of maintenance on some of the grid along the way. You pay delivery. So there's a fixed portion of the delivery, as well as the $1 per kilowatt. That's by the local distribution company, applies that to kind of maintain their distribution system locally. So electricity. So in the time of use, tiered, ultra low rate, and kind of contract pricing, this includes everything, all your pricing in there, global adjustment. And then, so it's actually not contract pricing, you pay $1 per kilowatt hour plus the global adjustment, which is a bit of a more complicated calculation, but it typically probably averages around, it's a bit of a range, maybe 6-7 cents per kilowatt hour on top of your base kilowatt hour price. And that's also similar pricing structure for a Class B customer, where you pay your formerly HOEP price or the OEMP price now, as well as your global adjustment there. So So typical electricity bill kind of breaks it down what you may see on your bill. Every utilities displays it a bit different. Every rate is sometimes a little bit different in terms of the customer charges, things like that. Transmission, distribution, you may or may not see some of these charges on your bill. It just depends on your situation. So customer charge, usually plus or minus about $40 per month, kind of keeps things up and running. Distribution charges. So the distribution, that's from for your local LDC to get the power to you. It's usually those charges are $1 up to $8 per kilowatt. So distribution is from your LDC to your building. And then your transmission charges, so network and connection charges, those are from the generators to get that to your local LDC. So transmission is the big lines to get all the large amount of power to the local distribution companies, and then the distribution is for them to kind of lower the voltage and bring it to your building there for you. So on the transmission side, you pay about $1.50 to $2.50 for our network and connection, so about almost just under $5 per kilowatt there as well. There. And if you're a larger customer, you may not pay the distribution. You may be connected directly to the transmission grid, so you may not see that distribution charge on your bill. So your demand charges may be a bit less than somebody who's connected to both there. So then you see your actual, so you have our kilowatts. So that's how fast you're using it, and that you need to be charged for that just in order to account for how everybody's turning on all their stuff all at once. The grid does have to kind of ramp up, bring on more capacity, so you do have to pay for them to increase that capacity. And then again, if your time of use, that's all built into one. This is kind of what you may see as a kind of bigger customer. Then you pay your energy charge. So you're right now it's the OEMP, which just changed in the last kind of, I think it's in the last 3 weeks. This has gone from the HOE price, which is more locally based. So it's based on your zone within the province and based on the needs in that zone at that time. And it's kind of designed to hopefully create some kind of more generation closer to where it's actually needed, so we can have more local generation and eventually hopefully drive down the price all throughout the province. So if, for example, somewhere where there's lots of population up in Toronto or Southern Ontario, if they're losing a lot of energy, they may pay a little bit more right now than say be somebody who's up in Northern Ontario. It's a little more sparsely populated, and they pay a little bit less just because there's not as much demand right now. And there's, again, Alex, I was going to post a link to this in the chat as well. There is a website out there, kind of I can show it to you here. I have it up on my screen. Find something. So there is kind of all the pricing. There's a few different, like, kind of, I'd say, tariff structures here. Oh, where did that go? Closed it down. Just give me 1 second. So the main website here is, there we go. Market data explained. And there's some links in here to get the actual pricing by location data there. So there's Ontario, virtual zones, there's inertia pricing. There's a few different structures there. Have a look at that if you're wondering why you're paying what you're paying. There's actually a nice little kind of heat map of the province to see the kind of live demand on there. So if you're kind of interested in that stuff, I find it quite interesting to look at that data, see what you're paying right now.
And I've linked it for you folks in the chat.
So then we have our regulatory charge. So this is a small charge to kind of keep the OEB, the Ontario Energy Board, things like that running. So it's the regulation. So it's about 4 cents kilowatt hour. So pretty small charge on there. But you may or may not see that one as well. And then we get into global adjustment depending on what situation you are. Again, residential, small business, you won't see this. It's all included. Class B. So these are usually up to 1 megawatt demand. You pay about an additional 2 to 12 cents, depending on what's been kind of kicked down to you from the Class A customers. So the Class A customers pay based on their peak load factor and their contribution to the 5 top peaks throughout the year in Ontario there. So whatever's not kind of consumed by those large users on their 5 top peaks, the remaining kind of dollar value of this true up is the global adjustment for kind of how the market works, gets passed down to the class B customers there. So, and again, if you are on class A, we do have more to come on there and kind of some strategies on how to potentially reduce your consumption based on those 5 top peaks, which are kind of might be potentially changing with more electrification in the province. Traditionally, I'd say they were relatively predictable when throughout the year, not the exact day is unpredictable, but when throughout the year they were predictable. But as more electrification comes on, more electric heating in the province, that could shift that how we predict when the peaks are going to come up in order for you to save money. But there's going to be a very detailed webinar on that coming up soon. So I'm not going to dive into that right now. So an activity here, we're going to go into this Ontario Energy Board bill calculator. So there's a couple different ones I might play around with. And we're going to compare a bill for 600 kilowatt hours of consumption using the default time of use pricing, the tiered pricing, and then the ultra low rate pricing. And I might, just given 600 kilowatts, that's kind of the break point for the tiered pricing. We can maybe just play around with some numbers, and we can jump in from this calculator. There's also a small business calculator, which I think may be a bit more handy in terms of being able to pick when you're using your energy throughout the day. This basic one, which I'm just going to refresh to start from 0, the residential doesn't allow you, it kind of calculates based on your consumption and based on a typical person's distribution through on-peak, mid-peak, and off-peak consumption. So we'll go through a few different things here. So we can select our utility. So there should be every utility in Ontario here. But again, they're going to be relatively similar. I'm going to pick my one is Innova Power. So it's formerly Waterloo North Hydro here. That's just where I'm located in Waterloo. I'm going to step 2 here. We're going to go and build your usage profile. So I'm going to pick the summer. That's where we are right now. I don't own an electric vehicle right now. So they do account for some electrical vehicle charging there. If you have an electric vehicle, you can do that. And then we can do total usage. So if I wanted to just go in here and put my 600 kilowatt hours, I can do calculate. It should come up at the bottom. So I can see at 600 kilowatt hours, which is kind of the activity we had designed here. We do have our time of use rate. So they've distributed kind of what a typical household would use. The majority is typically off peak. So you come home from work, do all your cooking stuff overnight is when you use most of your energy at home. So they have about half, maybe a little bit more, almost 2/3 of your energy consumed off peak. If you have a little bit less mid peak and then a little bit more on peak, and you can see your distribution on your local LDC website. I have a picture later of where you can find that there. So that brings us out to, with our delivery and regulatory charges, we're at about $112. The ultra low rate, this is where on your current structure of when you use your energy, so most of it off peak at the ultra low rate, it's going to work out to $122. But that's being said, given that I haven't distributed it over using the majority overnight, potentially, this is where this may not be the situation. So if you're home and if you're not using energy at night, this is probably not the rate structure for you. And then tiered is actually the cheapest in this situation because we're up to 600 kilowatt hours. That's kind of the break point here, where we would go from 9 cents a kilowatt hour up into that 11 cents a kilowatt hour. So if you're a very small user with 600 kilowatt hours, I would say it's a relatively small consumption. So if you're in a small, like a condo, townhome, things like that, I think until I put a heat pump in my house, I was in and around this many kilowatt hours with basically no air conditioning. So if I had air conditioning, I might jump up because it was broken, but this may have been the rate class that I should have picked. Although I can up it. So let's say recently for myself over the winter with my new heat pump put in, I was actually in the 1,500 to 2,000 kilowatt hours a month, just because I was going fully electric on my heat. So I would put somewhere in the middle, 1,750, to see what kind of, maybe if I should reevaluate how I get billed here. So it turns out if I have a more traditional usage distribution on off-peak, mid-peak, and on-peak. It's at $250.98. Then if I have the ultra low rate, I would have 285, so a little bit more, and then just about $7 or $8 more if I go with that tiered rate. So I mean, I'd say if you're evaluating what you want to do here, the tiered rate may actually be kind of the most predictable for a residential structure, but the default is kind of the time of use there. So now I think it's a little bit more handy to actually use this price periods function here, so I can actually tell the software or the tool when I use my energy here. So what I'm going to do here, and I think I have a picture up, I do have one over here somewhere, of when so for my previous 30 days in my house, I'm going to put in when I use the energy. So I can customize when I use this instead of using what the defaults distribution is now. So I could go my on-peak consumption for the last 30 days is, let's see, it was on was 172. Off was 167. I guess it was actually this last month is pretty predictable. I guess it's a shoulder season, not using too much heating or cooling. So I was, and my off was 360. So as I calculate that, it's going to redistribute that to see kind of what rate would be the best for me right now. And it does mean the tiered rate would be a little bit less actually. And maybe at my house, I should consider switching to the tiered rate. I've never done this for myself until right now in my own data. So maybe I save a few bucks a month if I switch to the time of use rate. And now, if you wanted to get really creative here, you can change your ultra low rate and kind of distribute what you use then. So maybe if you go out and you want to get some battery storage is one example of this, to kind of use creative ways to lower your bill. And I did the analysis a while ago on my house. I'm putting some batteries in and using this, and it was a pretty decent payback period on paying for the batteries at that time. It wasn't like 1 year, 2 years, it's in the 6 or 7 years, but hopefully those batteries would be lasting much longer than 6 or 7 years. So then would be making money off after that point, as long as this ultra low rate pricing continues for an extended period of time. So I can go in here and I could put in, let's say I would charge up my batteries, and let's say I have 700. Let's say I use the majority. Let's say I use 450 of my kilowatt hours at night in this situation, and then I can off peak. I say maybe I use a little bit more, 100, and then I use very little throughout the day. So this is not going to match my 600, but I'm just going to kind of simulate on peak. Maybe I use 75, then mid peak, do about 50 kilowatt hours there. So I can then go in there and see how this would affect my bill. So there, going with that ultra low rate, I could save about $20 a month on my electricity bill. And again, this kind of scales up if you're a larger user and maybe your business runs an overnight shift and does less energy during the day. So maybe something like a bakery, for example, or a small bakery where you may be baking overnight is more intensive than during the day. During the day, you're kind of just selling your products, maybe, then you could use this rate structure to kind of save yourself a few bucks there. So is there anybody here that's actually, raise your hand if you've explored the ultra low rate or you're on the ultra low rate program? No, it's an interesting one. I actually haven't talked to anybody use it, but I think it could get quite interesting in the next few years on that front. So there's also a similar calculator, or actually some advice on choosing your plan here. So the Ontario Energy Board does have good links on choosing your plan and kind of YouTube videos if you're interested in some of the information we kind of present today. There's a little additional stuff there on the website. And then there is a small business calculator as well. So I can pick my Innova Power Corp. I can do your monthly consumption. The default is just a little bit higher consumption, and I can also do it with the same kind of breaking out when I use those bills or when I use that consumption. So handy little tool if you're trying to evaluate where you should be and what saves you the most amount of money here. So I think for the most people, on average, Time of use is the best, but it is worth exploring. And that's kind of why time of use is the default for the majority of the province. So back to my, oops, thing. So next slide. So now we're going to kind of jump away from direct kilowatt hour consumption. And these calculators are not going to be directly useful for Class B. If you were Class B, this next kind of bit we're going to do right here may be a little bit handy in terms of talking about demand. But for Class B customers, if you would have to go into a bit more of an in-depth calculator there. It's a bit more complicated, but not overly complicated. Yeah. Because it's so situationally dependent on there, and there's not a lot of the average to use some of these tools is not easy to come up with. Residentially, you can come up with an average. Businesses are all quite different, so doing these calculators can be kind of difficult to come up with. So here's an example of what would be somewhat of a Class B customer where they do see a separate demand charge on your bill. So the cost and the price of electricity. So here's an example. This is a real world example from a few years ago. So some of the prices per kilowatt hour and per kilowatt may not line up exactly to what you see on your bill now, but they were reflective at the time and they are in the similar kind of magnitude. It's not changed by much. So in January, this company used approximately 250,000 kilowatt hours, which equated to $19,670 on their bill. In February 05, so 1 month later, they used 15 kilowatt hours more, but their bill went up to $20,632. So almost $1,000 increase in their bill for an extra 15 kilowatt hours. So energy was up 0.01%, cost went up 4.8%. So that equates to more than $65 per kilowatt hour if you were to calculate it straight up on the total cost on your bill divided by the kilowatt hours. So this is why it's important to think about what the projects you're going to do and how they affect your energy to apply the right pricing or right calculation to your savings calculation. So you have to do your savings calculation for your kilowatt hours. And then also what kind of caused this is upon investigation is the demand on your bill. So they had plus 15 kilowatt hours at 15 cents a kilowatt hour. So that was their price of electricity, but they had plus 60 kilowatts at approximately $16 per kilowatt they would be charging. So if you go in, if you want to dive really deep, you can go into your local LDC and they'll add up all your demand charges and see it should come out. It's probably going to come out to around $16 plus or minus a few bucks. And so they had 60 kilowatt demand at $16 a kilowatt. So that was a 60 kilowatt heater that was turned on for 15 minutes. That's all it was. And it shot up their demand and that set their peak for the day because you are billed on peak demand based on your kilowatts or your kVA, kind of whichever one is higher. So this demand thing, it can be real and it can cost a simple thing kind of being turned on in your building can cost you a lot of money if you're not aware of it and if it sets your peak. So this is going to come up with a demand profile that kind of illustrate how this works. So we have how fast on the kind of the y-axis, so how your demand. Then we have, it's coming up, we have our profile here. So that's the time along the bottom. It's white there, so it's not showing up. Well, how long once the graphic comes in. So how long for your hours. And this is kind of your daily, your cycling of what's going on in your building. So the orange part, so it's how long times how fast gives you the orange part, which is the area under the curve, which would be your kilowatt hours. So how much is kilowatt hours is the orange section, so area under the curve. Then your peak demand. So the fastest peak demand is this kilowatts at the dollars per kilowatt. So in this case, it was at $16 per kilowatt. So those are broken out each sector. And someone asked a question earlier about what the interval meter sees. It is actually broken out into 15-minute intervals. So the hourly Ontario energy price. So the price is based on an hourly, but the meter sees it on a 15-minute interval basis. So here we had a 60 kilowatt heater come on, and if it comes on at the wrong time, it's now going to set your peak demand. If it came on in one of these valleys here, depending on what time of day that is, then you would only be billed for the additional 15 kilowatt hours that it actually consumed over that time. So it's 60 kilowatts for 15 minutes divided by 4. that's at 15 kilowatt hours. So, but here it's 15 minutes at 15 kilowatt hours or 225. So the actual energy consumption charge was only $2.25, but the new peak is $960 there. So they someone turning on a heater, and again, maybe they needed it, but it did happen to set their peak demand. And if you are on a demand billing rate tariff structure, you do kind of have to consider when you turn certain electrical loads on in order to avoid setting your peak demand. But one way to sort of prevent this from potentially happen is if you take a look at the base load here in your building. If you can pull energy out of your base load, it will bring down the entire thing, and then your peaks will be even if you do set a new peak, it's not going to be as high as it once was. So any load that runs 24 hours or things that can be pulled out in that way that don't need to be, that can it's a foolproof way to kind of lower your peak demand, is reducing your base load. So on that note, we'll get some kind of myths around demand and peak demand. So one that we oftentimes hear is the startup of facility sets the peak demand. So this can be true, but it's not a rule. There's oftentimes, specifically with it's in a hot day in the summer, your peak is often going to be in the early afternoon, 2-3 o'clock, when the sun's at its highest, or there's enough time to heat up. So it's actually later in the afternoon. So the rule is not to assume it's going to happen at a certain time, is to let the profile speak to you. And you can see your profiles on your local LDC site. Kind of most customers will be able to do that. You can download it or even view right in there. You can download the data or see a demand profile. And you can usually see up until yesterday. So you can kind of use that to sort of go back in time and maybe predict when your peak may be happening and sort of maybe shift that. It can happen at start off. We do come across areas that I was recently working in a school. They were a school that was converted to kind of an artist's market, and they still had the electric heaters in each school turning on at 7:30 a.m. when no one was actually in the building. So they were setting their peak demand, and it was actually about 150 kilowatts. So they reduced a massive amount of energy or massive amount of cost each month by just controlling those startup things. So let the profile speak to you. Second one is that a soft start saves demand. So oftentimes you have large loads, a large motor, fans, pumps, things like that, you can put a soft start, so it kind of limits the inrush current that comes into the motor when it starts. So you can actually use a lot more energy on the motor for a small period of time when it's starting up. But because that only lasts for seconds, so it's not actually going to usually set your peak demand. So you want to think about, is it worth purchasing some of these soft starters on your motors? Is it actually going to reduce your demand? There may be other reasons you're going to do it. It may prolong the life of your device, but in terms of demand, it has almost insignificant on the demand. So what the demand meter sees. So yeah, this is where it doesn't always start in the morning. It's not always first thing you come in, you turn everything on. Oftentimes you can see here, this is our 15-minute data. You can see the peak demand of 15.4 kilowatts with a 94% power factor. So you can actually use some of this data you're able to download from your website to come up with you can become like a bit of a detective and determine what is coming on and off in your building. So 94% power factor, pretty high. You can use that to kind of determine what's going on. So this is the air conditioning coming on and off throughout the day. So it's actually at 3:21 in the afternoon, not 7 in the morning, 8 in the morning when people come on. And you can also see at night, and it's good sometimes, like looking at what's going on at night gives you the best opportunity to see kind of what we can cut out of our base load, which again is the foolproof way to kind of reduce all of your costs, demand and consumption. So night load, you can hear this building's pretty good. You can see their electric hot water heater cycling, but you can come in, look at your nighttime profile, this is not related to your energy bill, but just general good practice energy management. Oftentimes we see people doing night audits on their building. Go into your building, if you have even a small, medium, large building, see what's running at night. Recently did this on large tower in Toronto, and the opportunities are kind of massive that you can find people leaving lights on, leaving heaters on, even just finding that your HVAC system is running more than it should be. You think the BAS is doing what it's supposed to do, and it may not be doing that. So let the profile speak to you, see what's happening, and then actually go into the building and see what's going on there. So some kind of cost and energy saving strategies from understanding your bill. So you can assess and adjust your base load, phantom load, 24-hour loads, load factor. Kind of mentioned that throughout here. So this is the no cost foolproof method to save no matter what type of rate structure you're on. I mean, it's not necessarily always no cost. There is kind of tools out there, lots of different tools out there to kind of eliminate some of these things, because when it comes to energy management, or specifically in smaller in your home, time is the killer. That's when I first got into the energy management world. I was doing small like house audits, and my boss said is that in the residential world, it's death by 1,000 cuts. It's rarely ever one thing in your building that is causing your electricity load to be out of control. It's usually a combination of a lot of little small things and the things that are running for long periods of time. There's good chance that in your home at home, the little clock on your microwave, it actually uses more energy than the microwave itself when running, because that clock is even at about, I mean, 5, 10, maybe a bit more, depending on what your microwave watts, it runs continuously. You only probably use your microwave a few minutes a day, unless you're my wife who microwaves her coffee 20 times a day, then you probably you can, but you're not actually going to disconnect the clock. But just think about it in that way. Walk around your house. I do this sometimes at night. I'll walk around and see what little lights are on all of our devices that we have. We have so many little devices in our houses now, and I did this on a friend's house recently, and they found they had 250 watts just from their TV and gaming systems, all that stuff connected to their like home entertainment, running 24/7. That was the base, was 250 watts. And now they weren't so willing to turn some of those things off, because if you're a gamer or things like that, but that's a significant amount of energy. 200, like 1 watt running continuously for the entire year works out to approximately $2 per watt. So that 250 watts is potentially costing them $500 over the year just to be gaming. Now, maybe they're willing to eat that cost, but that's just it is available to you. And I use at my house, sometimes I use the smart plugs, so I can control them with my Alexa, Google Home. I have smart plugs plugged into things like my coffee maker that I don't actually need plugged in all the time. My what's the other one I have it plugged into? On my computer right beside me here, I have a smart plug, so I do shut it down overnight. So if you want to, you can get pretty extreme with this stuff if you want to, and cut out, like I know one of my father's friends, he actually disconnected his doorbell transformer because he said it was 5 watts. So he went down there. He's like, you can't use his doorbell. He's like, I don't want people ringing my doorbell anyway. But he got his night load in his house when there wasn't HVAC running. He got it down to like 30 watts in his house when he was sleeping. So you can get quite extreme with this stuff, and it can save you a lot of money. So the ultra low rate and battery storage, I've kind of mentioned that one already. So there's some creative ways you can do that. You could combine, if you wanted to get really extreme, combine your batteries with PV and the ultra low rate to kind of provide yourself a foolproof way to kind of save money. So you can charge your batteries with the PV or with the ultra low rate, or if it's cloudy, not good enough, you can run kind of on PV. Or if it is sunny and you've run your batteries at night, you can also just sell the energy back to the grid. So you can almost eliminate your bills in the right situation if you're willing to put in the initial capital investment. I know there is some funding out there right now for PV and battery storage as well. So I would look into the Save on Energy website. There is some incentives out there to put in solar as well from the federal government. They also do have incentives for some renewables right now. Not incentives, sorry, some interest-free loans. The incentives right now are not available. So I need to make sure I speak correctly there. So interest-free loans on doing that stuff. So now what I'm going to do now for the last kind of few minutes, I'm going to kind of go through a few things that you can get on your energy portal. I kind of wish I had an anonymous account to log in here. This is my account, so I've kind of hidden my personal details there. So This is a traditional one. This is a Nova Power, as I've mentioned, but most of them kind of look the same. And I think nowadays most people don't really go in and look at their PDF bill, things like that. They go onto their local website, they log in, they pay their bill. But there is a lot of information in here, and if you want to become a bit of a detective, you can find out a lot of information. And in a business situation, not in your home, you may be able to use some of this information that is free and available to you instead of going out and buying new meters. Oftentimes you want to sub-meter certain processes, but that can get quite expensive. You can get all of your interval data kind of up until the previous day for free from your LDC in Ontario. So you don't always need to go out and buy sub-meters unless you want to actually sub-meter a specific process in your building. So online there, so you can see my recent usage. They do provide a bit of a comparison there. So I used 229 kilowatt hours less in April from March. Sometimes comparing month to month isn't always great. That's just strictly to become I had less heat requirement in April than March. So I don't think I was actually saving or increasing my efficiency or performance in my house. I just used my heat pump a little bit less in that month. And again, it should continuously go down, hopefully in the next few months. And now the kind of the interesting one here on the main page is this. There's access to green button data. So everywhere in Ontario, every utility, every account should have access to green button data. It depends on how many accounts you have tied to your account. It can be a bit different. So you can download at minimum 2 years of data on the 15-minute interval basis there. So you can go in and grab green button. Green button is kind of a standardized format. So hopefully when you export it, everywhere across the province would export in the same format, and that can be then taken. It's an Excel sheet you get. You can take it and do your own analysis in Excel, or you can go out and actually import it into other tools to maybe analyze more detailed performance of what's going on in your building. So green button data is available to you. I'd say just be a little bit cautious with it. I know with my specific LDC here, it was actually meter data that comes down instead of the consumption data. So I had to do a bit of a calculation to come up with my consumption. So sometimes it can be a little bit inconsistent, and it can be inconsistent on how you can download it. If you have a large portfolio of buildings, sometimes you can download the entire portfolio's worth of data, or sometimes you have to go into each building and download it. So if you have a relatively large portfolio, that can get quite difficult to do. So just use it with caution, but it is a good way to get data. So in your kind of when you dive into kind of some of the graphs, you can see here that you can see your historical billing over time and kind of how it relates to weather. You can turn on like kind of the maximum temperature, the minimum temperature, the average temperature, and kind of hopefully depending on your heating and cooling systems in your building, if you have just cooling with electricity, you see kind of the temperature goes up in the summer, your electricity is going to go up. You kind of want to follow that, and it goes back down in the winter. If you don't see that pattern, then there may be some opportunity in kind of the winter months when you're not seeing a drop in your consumption to maybe what's going on in your building. So what am I doing? Am I running space heaters that are kind of causing it to be come up when I could be running something else to maybe heat my building there? So kind of gives you some opportunities there. You can also see this is where you can pull, if you're trying to use that calculator to figure out what rate structure would be the best for you. So depending on what date range you show in the graph on the top left here, this will tell you where you're distributed between your off-peak, mid-peak, and on-peak consumption there. So you can use that to plug and play or do your own calculation on what the best rate structure for you would be. Then you can get into kind of some of the interval data that's kind of been compiled up into daily or hourly data. So the left-hand graph here, this is the last 30 days in my house, and it also breaks it out when you use it throughout the day. I would say my house, I probably distribute it more evenly throughout the day because me and my wife both work from home. So we don't leave the house and have a time when we don't use it during the day. It's kind of distributed relatively evenly on peak, off peak, and mid peak. And then I may want to go back now that I just loaded this picture in this is from recently. So that back on about 26 days ago, what happened on the weekend that caused me to use a significant amount more energy. So you can dive in and say, oh, what happened this day? was there something going on? I used this a few years ago. I had a leak that I didn't know about in my hot water tank. I was actually out of the province at the time, but I was able to take this data to figure out, okay, well, what was leaking and then reheating water and leaking and reheating water. Why is it cycling? I also have a separate meter on my house. I was able to dive in there and from the load profile, figure out that that was my hot water heater that was cycling on and off. And I knew the capacity of my hot water heater. I actually used that to determine exactly what was going on and sent someone over to kind of shut that off for you. So if you want to get deep into this stuff and spend a few bucks and get a meter, know what you're looking for, it can be quite handy coupling about a $150 meter with the free data that's available to you on your local LDC. You can quickly prevent things from going too awry in your building. Water leaks like that can get quite extensive quite quickly, especially if it's the water consumption as well as the energy to heat them. And then on the bottom right-hand side here, I can actually see my hourly consumption from the previous day here. And then the blue line is the, I believe that's the temperature outside. Oh, no, it's the cumulative. That's the cumulative one. I haven't turned on the temperature. That's the cumulative consumption throughout the day here. So you will see that kind of going up. And you can also overlay the temperature on that as well to hopefully see that you're building with, I mean, with heating and cooling as being electric, it's actually quite nice to see. You can see it following the weather because that is going to be the primary driver of your energy consumption in your home is going to be the weather. And specifically with heat pumps, you'll see it in your electricity profile there. So I think there's a question about the, let's see. Is any tool or application required to open the green button data? Nope, it shouldn't be. You should be able to open the Excel file. And then is it possible to download the data independently or use a third-party application that uses green button data? So do you mean that question? Is it possible to download the data? Like, just clarify that question a bit.
I was just giving a bit of context that it's possible to do both.
Oh, sorry, well, not a question. Yeah, sorry.
yeah, no problem. Yeah, so you can download it independently with Excel and manipulate it yourself, or some platforms are able to harness the data as well.
Yeah, there is platforms. One of them specifically, federal government software that I work with quite a lot is Red Screen Expert. You can connect it directly to that, so it's quite handy. So that's kind of the conclusion on understanding your energy bill and kind of using some of that information to kind of hopefully save you some money and energy. So there's a question there. So Aaron, your question, there's a few questions there. Just in the interest of time, I'd say, can you send me an email with those questions and we can maybe take the chat offline, that maybe dive into a bit of a can of worms on how to do that. And there is things you can do in your situation there. VFDs would work, things like that, staggered starts. So just in the interest of time, send me an email. Alex, if you can type my email in the chat for me, and then we can take that offline at some point. And I know, again, that kind of leads into some of the post webinar, the training and support coaching that is available to you here. So yeah, reach out to me and we can set up some kind of free coaching with that situation for you. So
absolutely, and I'll take over here. For the last question that just came in at the beginning of the chat, I will share it again. The presentation will be available soon, not right away, but it will be available at the link I'm about to send. And you can also catch some of the past webinars in this series and also get an idea of some of the other webinar series that are out there by checking out this link. And so, yeah, there's plenty of tools and resources provided by Save On Energy to distribute kind of energy efficiency knowledge and information. And so we encourage you to reach out in different ways. And so one of those ways is by taking part in these webinars, but we also have virtual one-on-one coaching with industry professionals. So this could be a case where you're looking to gain more information about a specific use case in energy efficiency. It could be that you're working in a building and you have energy management data that you're looking to manipulate or work with or understand how to use a particular software better, or a whole range in between. So if you find yourself in that demographic, please reach out through the post-webinar support intake form. And within 7 to 10 days, someone will get back to you and we'll put you in touch with a industry professional that best suits your needs within our resources. There's a monthly bulletin where you'll see all the different webinars and all the different fact sheets that are coming out, or potential in-person sessions and so forth, as well as the live training calendar. So yeah, please reach out. I'm also going to link an email in the chat that goes, if you have any questions beyond what is talked about in those on those platforms, then you can reach out to the training and support at IESO.ca email address, and someone will gladly help point you in the right direction. And also, if you have more questions about the training that's not in the post-webinar support intake form, please reach out there. Lastly, Adam, if you wouldn't mind heading to the next slide. After this webinar, you can expect to get a survey looking for your feedback. And so basically, we want to ensure that the folks that are attending these webinars are getting the information that's most pertinent or most interesting in terms of what they want to learn about and increasing the energy literacy within the province in Ontario. So please take that time to give your feedback on today's session, but also inform us and the people developing this information, kind of what you're looking for in future webinars or what you're looking to learn more about. And so I'm going to open up the floor one last time for any questions. If there's no questions, then I encourage everyone to have a great day and have a great weekend. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Keep an eye out for the next webinar in this series of energy fundamentals. Thanks so much.
Thank you.